Well, I thought I'd make a video about meditation since it came up a little bit in our Zoom yesterday, and I know everybody has this idea. Well, I'm just projecting really, but I mean people have this idea in general. If I just generally tar everyone with the same brush, that meditation should be done in a quiet place and like in a rainforest or whatever. And I am here, like this is a rainforest. I'm at a little cafe here having a hot chocolate, and just see if I can. You can Google me up if you're international. There you go. That's where I am in Australia, so you'll get the idea. But across the road there is, oh, you can't see it. Anyway, there's a waterfall and it sort of cascades down, and there's a little tiny stream down here that sort of flows into it and goes up there. Anyway, but if it weren't for the cars and everything else like that, you would say, oh, that's a lovely place to sit and meditate. But it is quite noisy and intermittently, which ironically, if you really want to learn to meditate and you're not just trying to, how would I put it, got hiccups, if you're not just trying to adjust to the hustle and bustle, then somewhere like this is a perfect place, because you have the noise and the background interruption and everything else like that, and it actually forces you into a deeper sense of purpose and a deeper application with your meditation. I remember some years ago I watched a little video by a girl who was teaching meditation, and she was actually sitting on the side of a highway. We don't really have any highways around here, but this is probably about the busiest intersection in this little area where I live at the moment. So I thought I'd come down here specifically and do the video. So the idea of meditation, where you would sit still for some period of time, that tends to be most people's sort of introduction to meditation, where you'd spend as much time as you can staying focused on trying to still the mind, or going beyond the noise of the mind, or refusing to listen to the chit-chat of the mind, until you had some kind of realization of internal solace, internal peace. And that's definitely one form of meditation. And if you did combine that with a preliminary mantra style recitation for a moment of some kind of grounding, perhaps I'll call it grounding, focusing, centering, concept or idea that is useful to you, such as I'm not a body, I am free, I am still as God created me, which is advocated in the second half of A Course in Miracles in the workbook, you'll find that it's somewhat easier to get into a more meditative state and to be able to let go of the externalized world and the noise and the hubbub of it and fall into that sort of more inner silence. Doesn't mean you're not going to become distracted by trucks and things that go by, but that noise, when you realize that the outside world and the inside world are the same, you can focus more definitively on the internal world, and you will eventually, I'll say eventually because it tends to come with practice, you will eventually have moments of realizing that, let's say, you haven't heard the external world for some time. They've sort of blended into the one effort to overcome distraction and increase focus. The Course in Miracles in the workbook if you're kind of aware of meditation, if you're someone who's been around meditation for a little while, you will probably be aware that there are all sorts of different meditative practices. And creative visualization is also included in that, as people with a more abstract or more artistic mind or a more creative mind usually will find, I have to talk in usuallys and possiblies, but usually will find that with a little bit of creative visualization, like in the idea that some people actually can see thoughts. I can, right? So my thoughts appear to me as visual images in my mind. And I remember the talk by Helen Schuckman when she was talking about how she started hearing the voice. And she said it began with a series of dreams and episodes where she had an incredible heightened sense of visual imagery, which was unusual for her because she was very academic and had an academic mind. But it's not unusual, and a lot of people actually tell me that they can see their thoughts in pictures, some in black and white, some in colour. I used to see mine in colour, but lately they're kind of black and white and reasonably diminished, and they don't tend to have a lot of bearing anymore on my relevant position, if you like, or my relevant realization of things. They're sort of all bundled in together with nothing I see means anything, which is the first lesson of the course. And that tends to be a natural occurrence, not something I'm trying to force or anything like that. It just seems to be how it is, and so you just go with it. But in the early part of the workbook, some of those lessons, I think it's lesson 16 or 14, one of those very early lessons where Jesus says, try to push through the clouds and try to imagine his hand reaching out to you through those clouds and taking his hand, which is a very specific visualization. And whilst that one didn't work for me, the mantra style meditative practice toward the back of the workbook definitely did work for me for a certain while, and I made good use of it. And I think that's in about the 260s or 280s, but don't jump to it. I mean, you'll get there when you get there, and the workbook is structured very specifically for that reason. Nowadays, I don't meditate, of course, at all, because the purpose of meditation is to teach you how to open your mind to your higher self, to your more, what would you call it? Well, to your own inner guidance, to your own divinity. And I find now that if I try any of the practices of meditation that I still recall from my past, all that happens is I kind of get blocked out, and I don't know how to talk about that. But if I sit in my, like that, as I'm sure you've seen me do in other videos, if I sit in my open-minded, and I don't know how to talk about that, but if I sit in the place where my mind just opens, then I have these flashes of light and this illumination. But I also get this kind of zap through the body, which goes along with it, which propels me back out of that state. And some of you who have a more mature understanding of meditation might be tempted to say, well, you're observing the state, and the observation of it pushes you out of it, obviously. But this has been happening for 20 years. And I've had realizations of being the observer, entering into that state and being pushed out of it, and other realizations of actually transitioning right through that state into the light and then coming back out again. And the only real reference I have for that is, well, actually there's a couple of references. So the sole responsibility of the miracle worker, let's say, is to accept atonement for himself. And having done that, having experienced direct union with God, and releasing, this is a big part, releasing the inner light. There is no inner light in me to release again. And the Course in Miracles talks about it as a once occurrence, and then goes on to say something along the lines of when you return to Earth, that light will again travel with you, but this time you won't be able to hold it captive. It will be, which is what you're doing. Trust me, I know a lot of people don't like to hear that, but you're trying to keep the light captive or hide your light under a bushel. But the idea is when you come back, and when I came back, I was completely downloaded. Like Annie talks about it for her experience, and if you haven't watched the videos with Annie and I talking together, they're incredible. But Annie talks about it as the same sort of thing. She was downloaded with the Course, and she had the whole thing as an instant download. And that was exactly the same for me when the illumination occurred and I found myself back in the world after that, which is actually before that happened, which I don't want to get into that on this video. But I didn't actually recognize straight away that I had the download, because it took me quite some time to realize that everybody, well, not everybody else, but most other people at that healing center were having a hell of a time wrapping their head around it. And whilst I had my moments with it, when I would read it, I would automatically have these thoughts like, how is this so difficult? Why are people having trouble? It's just a very simple teaching, and it's completely obvious. And it was like it was like a children's book to me in many of its dimensions, like a beginner's book. But prior to that experience, however, I am absolutely certain I would have recognized bits of it, but I would have been dumbfounded by most of it. So the experience is essential. I want to try and cover a fair bit in meditation on this video, because there are so many different types. There's a hypnotic kind of meditation where somebody else, let's say, and I'll put it as somebody else because that's how it happened for me. You can be taken into a trance or taken into a deep meditative state by mental suggestion, which a hypnotist does. And my very first experience of the light was that way at a session with a hypnotist. I got into everything. But when I talked to the hypnotist about it, she had no clue what I was talking about. She'd never had anybody experience any kind of light before during a deep dive into hypnosis. And so I realised in that was the end of my participation with her, because I could do that by myself. As I was talking about in the Zoom meeting, there's also a kind of open-eyed meditation, which is more specifically regarding the idea of focus, which is to sit with eyes open, staring at a candle flame in a dimly lit room, and keep your focus on that candle flame for as long as you can, which sounds fairly easy, but give it a try and you'll be quite surprised how difficult it is at first. The mind tends to be distracted by the little dancing flame, and there's all sorts of other practices. I'm only just sort of referring to a few that I'm familiar with and that I've been through on my own particular sojourn with the spiritual world, or the floating world, if you want to call it that, the spiritual world. As I said in the Zoom meeting, and Tina's just posted that up, so if you haven't watched that Zoom meeting, it goes for a couple of hours, I think. It'll be the video directly below this one in my playlist, or in the on my channel. And I don't know if Tina's going to put it into a playlist with the other Zoom meetings. I think we should leave it out for a while. But there's a fair bit I talk about in there with regards to meditation. I don't know whether I'm covering the same ground again in this video particularly, or if there's anything more helpful that I'm disseminating in this, but meditation and prayer, actually, that's what I wanted to get to. Meditation and prayer should not become ritualistic, right? So in a specific sense and for a specific purpose of mind training, when you're doing the Course in Miracles through that workbook, right, 1 lesson a day for a whole year, you'll notice that the emphasis in the first half of the workbook is on undoing the way you see things now, and if you do that properly, you will absolutely have an experience of shift and change and all that sort of stuff, maybe an illuminate experience. And the second half of the workbook is designed and seems to be, to me, more orchestrated around the more meditative practice and the remembering component of being the Christ, you know, like remembering what you are. It's like, well, I am the light, you know, along with you. So in that context only, the workbook has a very, you could say it's ritualistic. There is everything's in sets of lessons, and there seems to be these 10 lessons or 20 lessons are structured around a particular type of meditation. Then there's other lessons that are more like affirmations, and all of it works together. But eventually you get to the end of the workbook where hopefully with integrity you've had an incredibly comprehensive and all-rounded introduction to spiritual discipline, and you're kind of left to your own devices. And from that point on, and this is only from me, right? If you feel it differently, so be it. But from that point on, when Jesus says there are no more lessons because you have no need of them, I take him at his word on that. Right? We're talking about Jesus here, so I take him on his word for it. And for me, right, since you're watching my video, meditation and prayer became very much as needed, as I felt in my heart, as I felt guided. I dropped all kind of ritualism about prayer and meditation, because familiarity breeds contempt. And if you're not really in prayer or meditating from a place of conscious and heartfelt calling, then there's not really any passion in it. And I'm just being very general about that, but maybe there is for you passion in it, or maybe you'll tell me, no, I'm always passionate about prayer and meditation. But for me, I had to feel it, right? I got to feel it. You know when you need to pray because your mind's not at peace. You know when you need to meditate because you realize somewhere you've got to put in more effort. And the human construct is intrinsically lazy. It's comfort and its own abundance, or its guiding, you know, like you got to look at the whole thing as ego. It's like the whole domain, the external domain, is the realm of ego. And just because you found a book about spiritual principles and the application thereof doesn't mean you're out of that domain. It means that you're in transition. So I always think it's better not to trust yourself, and rather to put all your trust and faith into God or into the universal power, and allow yourself to be wrong about everything, including everything I'm talking about now. Right? So there's not really a blueprint, you know, there's not really a blueprint specifically. And one of the things that I have found from my own experience is that if you follow a format, if you're going to classes and doing all that sort of stuff, that should only be really looked at as a temporary measure, and you shouldn't set it as a life participation or as a thing that you're gonna, you know, it's like whatever you find here on earth as a method or as an idea or a way or whatever, you always want to be going beyond it. It's like, all right, I'm going to use this as a stepping stone until I reach the place where there's nothing, right? Now, it is possible to reach that place right here, right now, because that's the only place where salvation is actually being offered, or liberation is being offered. But in the interests of the process of purification and transformation, it can look like anything. And there tends to be this drifting. It looks like a bit of a drifting, or sometimes it looks like guidance or whatever, but whatever it is, it feels natural when you look back on it, but going from one thing to another. And I find that as some people receive the gifts of the Spirit, like clairvoyancy and foreseeing things and healing and whatever, and I've had that for myself, and and that comes through meditation, through experience, through revelation. And it's different for everybody in a certain respect, but the thing you got to watch out for, the trap in all of that, is that you don't turn it into part of an identity and start calling yourself, oh, I'm a healer or I'm a clairvoyant. It's like, no, you're not. You're the Christ, and you're just getting some confirming activity or some confirming gifts that you can use along your way, and they last as long as they last. And any attempt to kind of structure them into some kind of format or some kind of what would you call it, process, diminishes them, like totally diminishes them. And whilst there is historic references of people being clairvoyants for most of their lives and healers and all that sort of stuff, I would not, from my own experiences and from talking to others, I would not encourage anyone to put down roots in anything on a temporal level, even if that looks like being used by the Spirit. You know, so there's always this, until the revelation, until the memory of God is restored to you, there's always more work to do. It's like keep going, keep going, keep going. And I've had many, and I'm getting off the subject of meditation here a little, but I've had many experiences of seeing healing, if you want to call it that, or transition of light, or transmission of light, activation of light through my hands, which you would say, oh, you're a healer or whatever. And people who do Reiki like to associate in that same kind of thread, you know. But I'm very much aware that all earthly states are temporary, and whilst it is a spiritual gift, the fact that it comes through the body, the fact that it involves the use of the body, defines it as temporary. Right? The whole point is to get beyond the body, beyond the sun and the stars and the moon and the states of all things visible is an arc of golden light shining into infinity and forming a circle where there's nothing inside that isn't outside the circle, etc. Which is pretty much what it says, almost word to word, I hope, as best as I can recall it, in A Course in Miracles. And that's the goal. That's what you're looking for. However, I shouldn't say that's the goal. That's the whole point of it. But your goal is to achieve that stillness of mind so that you can become revelation ready for that experience through the prayerful and meditative participation that's being offered. So all earthly states are temporary by definition. Try not to turn them into, and you'll kind of know, you kind of know when you're done with something. It's like, oh, I see that I'm done with that and whatever. And that doesn't mean that those gifts are still not in your toolbox if a need shows up for it later on. But it means just don't get stuck in that mindset. Always be open to more, because God only gives. Right? There is no limitation, and just because you become enamored and fascinated and thrilled and happy to have finally received some kind of spiritual power or some sort of spiritual gift, don't stop. Keep going. All right. But always, that's always with guidance, and you got to follow your heart with that as well. So for me, my transition through that stuff seems to have been fairly rapid. A matter of perhaps a 10 or 12 year period, which I consider to be quite rapid. I've known symptoms and occurrences of the spirit being manifest and played out through the body as either personal healing and transitional cellular stuff going on, or as gifts, or as what, to last for years and years and years. And some of them, like the one where I would fall down, that I would experience a flash of light across the threshold of my consciousness, and my body would be like a puppet with the strings suddenly cut, and I would just collapse to the floor. It was impossible to stand up. That went on for about 10 years. I had no control over it. Didn't really have any idea about it, and all my teacher Ted would say to me was, dude, fall up, not down. Which wasn't really helpful. It's like, I don't know what the hell's going on. I'm just, I'm not a body, but here I am, my body's just blip onto the floor again. And that would be sometimes 20 times a day. It's like, if I didn't know I was in a spiritual process, I would probably go to the hospital and they would tell me I'm having some kind of attack, epilepsy or something, because that's pretty much what it was like. I didn't pass out, didn't have a fit, but it was damn close. It was it was full on. It was like a big charge, a big bolt of electricity just going through my body. Anyway, that's about it. I just wanted to cover those bases again. More about meditation. When you get to the second half of the workbook of A Course in Miracles, I mean, the whole way through, it's incredible. I mean, you read any one of those lessons and it just blows your mind, and you're like, whoa. And you think, how can it get any better than this? I've just had my mind blown, like for a whole day, just walking around just going, wow. But when you get to the second half and you start doing those more meditative lessons with that sort of more mantra style introduction to the lesson, into the jumping off point of stillness, for me, it wasn't wow, it wasn't amazing, it was beneficent. There was a shift, there was something, I couldn't even tell you, man, it was amazing. It was amazing. Something occurred. Like, I found it so easy to slip into stillness. Whereas prior to doing the workbook, everything was just noisy and like people talking in my head, that voice you hear in your head, the internal monologue. It was just like a room full of people chatting away. It was horrific. I used to, lesson 12, I had my first experience, like really profound experience with the workbook. This is after illumination, but lesson 12, I woke up the next day. When I went to bed, my mind was noisy. Like, the only way I could describe it was if I was in a warehouse full of boxes, like a big factory full of boxes and junk and stuff, and I had nowhere to move. There was so much crap in there, I didn't have any freedom. And then the next day, I woke up and my mind was completely blank. There was no warehouse, no boxes, no nothing, and it felt like I was a tiny white bird in a vast blue sky, just free. And that was my first, with the workbook, my first experience, and I was able to maintain that sense of freedom and that inner peace, that perfect inner peace, for about 3 days, and then the internal monologue started again, that chatter started again, but it showed me what was possible. I had a really good look at it, and it was like, wow, that's what I want. I want this peaceful mind. And then doing the rest of the workbook and practicing those lessons, it's brought that about. So now, unless I'm talking, there really isn't a great deal of chit-chat in my mind. Sometimes I get prompted for things, and it's kind of pretty peaceful in there, and I'm very happy with that idea. Anyway, that's it. Love you guys. And to everyone who came to the Zoom meeting, thank you. To everyone who's still contributing money for the little books, thank you. The more money, the better. Also, please like and subscribe. I keep forgetting to ask people to do that. Please like and subscribe, because it does help to get this out a bit somehow. Ideas are increased by sharing. And if you were at the Zoom meeting, you will have heard the happy news that Tyna is estimating that we should have those little books or all the files going to the printer within 3 weeks. She's doing the final editing now, and then she will send it back to me for double checking, I guess. And Annie is also contributing something from Ted, which will be in there towards the back, I think. So it's going to be a nice little booklet, and it'll fit in your pocket, in the back of your jeans pocket, or in your handbag or whatever. So when you're having a moment and you're totally blitzed out by the world, you can just grab it out. It's a very thin little book, 50 pages or so, and you can sit quietly and do your own sort of you know, reading and grounding and everything like that, which often out in the world, it's hard to find a moment to do that. And if you don't have a reference, the mind can spiral into chaos very, very quickly, especially during that early periods of mind training, because the ego really resents the idea that you don't want to listen to it anymore. All right, don't trust that voice in your head. Don't trust that ego. You'll know when you hear the voice for the Holy Spirit, the voice for God. You'll know there's a mega difference. All right, peace.